Thank you for joining us today on Earthfile. Welcome to the program. I'm Ayola Kasim. The United Nations General Assembly voted on Wednesday, the 29th of March, to pass a resolution asking the International Court of Justice to define the obligations of states to combat climate change, a legal opinion that could drive countries to take stronger measures and clarify international law. This is the first time the world's top court will advise on countries' legal responsibilities on climate change. Some see it as a step that should make it easier to hold polluting countries legally accountable for failing to tackle the climate emergency. The Republic of Vanuatu was the driving force behind the 4-year campaign, leading a core group of 18 countries ranging from Costa Rica to Germany. The United States did not support the resolution. Many have called the United Nations vote an epic win for climate justice. In the meantime, let's look at what this will achieve in the long run. Just stay with us. On Friday, the 31st of March, as climate advocate Cynthia Onyuhi sits on a beach in Australia, breathing in the sea breeze, she's reminded of her home and childhood back in the Solomon Islands.
So I grew up in the remote part of Solomon Islands. I was surrounded by the environment a lot. I was in the sea after school, had to cross the sea to go to school. And during lunchtime, we usually fish for our own lunch. So we would catch about maybe 1 if we're lucky. Sometimes when we're very lucky, we get 4. But it depends on if you're willing to be patient for the fish to bite the hook. So being here on the beach really brings back those memories and kind of re-emphasize for me, you know, sort of the reason why we're doing this, why this initiative is very important. Is because of what we've experienced as child and children, and we want our children to be able to do that.
Like many Pacific Islanders, she grew up with the ocean, her culture and heritage intertwined with the nature around her. But now, with rising sea levels threatening to erase the islands and the stories she grew up with, she likens the potential loss of her culture to sand slipping through her fingers and is left wondering what will be left for her children.
That this feeling, you know, when the sand is slipping between your fingers, that's what it feels like for us. When we're trying to hold on to our languages, our cultural practices, our land, and it's slipping between our fingers like that because of the adverse effects of climate change. But we will fight, we will fight.
Disheartened by the lack of change happening, Cynthia and 26 other law students banded together in 2019 and started a campaign to bring climate change to the world's top court. They asked the International Court of Justice to define the obligations of states to combat climate change.
Our culture is so intertwined with the environment that if it's gone, if our land is gone, what will I say is part of my children's heritage? You know, like what is that? Will I provide? So it's that worry. I'm not a parent now, but I can imagine having, like in the future, having a conversation with my child and looking in them in the eyes, and if they ask, did you do your part? I want to be able to look into, if I'm lucky, my child's eye and say, we did try, you know, we did try.
And on Wednesday, the 29th of March, the United Nations General Assembly voted to do just that.
May I take it that the Assembly decides to adopt draft resolution A/77/L58. It is so decided.
26-year-old Cynthia is still in shock over their successful campaign, which was eventually adopted and spearheaded by officials from the Republic of Vanuatu. She says her younger self, who dreamt of pursuing environmental law, would not have believed it.
I was trying to figure out how to navigate the English language at that level. And imagine saying UN, that's up there, you know. And I come from a very small town, and we have less access, not too much access to the outside world. We are aware of the outside world, but we don't have that much access. And how do I get there? How, tell me if you're telling me if one day I'll be with a group initiating this UN resolution. Tell me how, because I don't see it if you were telling me that time.
When she isn't busy with her advocacy or studies, Cynthia relies on soccer to unwind and ensure she still has the energy to continue the fight.
Go, girl. Oh, unlucky. You know, my mental health is very important. I always encourage people to value their mental health. So this is sort of where I get my mental health sort of fixed, if that makes sense. So when I play, I'm just free. I don't, there's no worry about what I'm going to do next. I know there's a lot to do next, and it's a long journey, you know, especially in this fight. We still have a long way to go. But in that moment when I'm playing, I'm just free.
Cynthia is president of the Pacific Island Students Fighting Climate Change Group, a group that started in a classroom at the University of South Pacific and now has members from all Pacific Island nations, some as young as 12 years old. She graduated from the University of the South Pacific with a Bachelor of Law in 2020 and moved to Sydney from Honiara at the start of 2023 to pursue a Masters of Law.
This is our chance to provide evidence and our stories. Pacific Islanders are very good storytellers, so this would be a chance for us to tell our stories, our climate stories, to the highest platform in the world.
Vanuatu, which has a population of 319,000 spread across 80 islands, is still reeling from two Category 4 cyclones that struck within a week earlier in March, as more than 3,000 people remain in evacuation centers. The push for the resolution was driven by Vanuatu and a core group of 18 countries ranging from Costa Rica to Germany. On the eve of the vote, Vanuatu diplomats were still trying to win support from China and the United States, or at least to convince the two biggest greenhouse gas emitting countries not to raise objections. The United States did not support the resolution at the General Assembly. It could take the International Court of Justice around 18 months to issue an advisory opinion that could clarify financial obligations countries have on climate change, help them revise and enhance national climate plans submitted to the Paris Agreement, and strengthening domestic policies and legislation. The resulting advisory opinion could be a vital input to the burgeoning climate-driven lawsuits around the world. There are upwards of 2,000 cases pending worldwide. Vanuatu Prime Minister Ismail Kasakau said the resolution and advisory opinion will have a powerful and positive impact on how we address climate change and protect present and future generations.
As the principal judicial organ of the United Nations and a judicial body considered a world court, the ICJ is uniquely positioned to make this contribution. An advisory opinion is a constructive and unconfrontational route to pursue such an initiative. It is not legally binding. However, it does carry enormous legal weight and moral authority. This resolution and the advisory opinion it seeks will have a powerful and positive impact on how we address climate change and ultimately protect the present and future generations. Together, we will send a loud and clear message, not only around the world, but far into the future, that on this very day, the peoples of the United Nations, acting through their governments, decided to leave aside differences and work together to tackle the defining challenge of our times, climate change. I pray that we may be bound in one accord. Faftai Polap.
The Foreign Secretary of Bangladesh called the resolution's passage a defining moment that can help bridge the gap between climate finance promises made to vulnerable countries and what is delivered.
Despite greater needs in financing just transition and adaptation, we see growing expenditure in military budgets, armaments, in funding wars and conflicts, or even bailing out companies during financial crisis. Mr. President, against this backdrop, this resolution presents a defining moment for us. We hope this resolution and the consequent advisory opinion will provide a better understanding of the legal implications of climate change under international law and the rights of present and future generations to be protected from climate change.
Other international courts and tribunals are also being asked to clarify and define the law around climate obligations, including the Inter-America Court of Human Rights and the International Tribunal for Law of the Sea.
Today, we have witnessed a win for climate justice of epic proportions. I'm proud beyond measure that today the United Nations General Assembly has overwhelmingly adopted by consensus Vanuatu's resolution on climate change and human rights. For more than 30 long years, most countries have considered that their only obligations on climate change are found within the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. But friends, the UNFCCC is only one international legal instrument, and one in which there are few legally binding or enforceable obligations. That is why we see time and time again Paris pledges, promises and commitments made under the Paris Agreement seem to take us dangerously closer to the limit of 1.5 degrees. But today, the nations of the world asked a critical set of questions on climate obligations to the world's highest judicial body, the UN's International Court of Justice. The court will help to clarify the other legal instruments under international law that also contain climate obligations. Importantly, the court will tell us what the legal consequences are for states that disregard these laws and cause climate and environmental harm. Vanuatu sees today's historic resolution as the beginning of a new era in multilateral climate cooperation, one that is more fully focused on upholding the rule of international law, and an era that places human rights and international equity at the forefront of climate decision-making.
The Pacific Island law students celebrated the vote 4 years after they suggested an International Court of Justice resolution to Vanuatu officials.
Young people, of course, standing across everywhere, joining hands with the Pacific Island students, as well as young people has been focusing on the campaign. We look optimistically toward the future, especially to the second phase, where the matter will then refer to the court and initiate the court proceedings. We hope to see that young people's voices, as well as voices of other vulnerable groups across the world, can be represented truthfully and meaningfully at the International Court of Justice.
Still seems surreal, like I'm still trying to pinch myself to, I know I haven't had enough sleep, but like, wake up, you're dreaming or something like that. It's amazing to see and humbling to see how this wild idea that we had 4 years ago make its way from our classroom in the University of the South Pacific to the table or the floor of the United Nations General Assembly. and to receive such a historic UN vote, they vote by consensus. So that is, I still can't believe it's happened. We are in the critical decade, so it's good that people, and especially influential leaders, acknowledging that, and also symbolic in their vote by unanimous vote that was done at the United Nations General Assembly. So we do acknowledge that as well, and we feel very encouraged that and it's not just our concern, but our leaders are listening to our voices as well.
Advisory opinion by the court, judicial organ of the United Nations, will not be binding in any jurisdiction, but could underpin future climate negotiations by clarifying financial obligations countries have on climate change, helping states revise and enhance national climate plans submitted to the Paris Agreement, as well as strengthening domestic policies and legislation. Vanuatu, an archipelago of islands 500 miles west of Fiji, with about 325,000 inhabitants, was in February hit by 2 Category 4 hurricanes within 72 hours of each other. They caused widespread infrastructure damage, evacuation, and left residents without water and electricity for several days. Island nations and developing countries such as Vanuatu, the Solomon Islands, Madagascar, and Sri Lanka have contributed least to global greenhouse gas emissions, but are bearing the brunt of erratic and extreme weather events such as hurricanes, floods, drought, and extreme heat and floods that is upending water and food security and fueling forced migration. The historic resolution was adopted as countries met in Egypt for the first time to discuss the creation of a loss and damage funding facility to compensate countries for the irreversible effect of extreme weather events and sea level rise that are too late to avoid by climate adaptation and mitigation. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres welcomed the action, warning time is running out for nations to act boldly to fight global warming. He said that if an International Court of Justice opinion was given on climate issues, such an opinion will assist the General Assembly, the United Nations, and member states to take bolder and stronger climate action that the world so desperately needs.
The IPCC report shows that limiting temperature rise to 1.5 degrees is achievable, but time is running out. The window is rapidly closing to avoid the worst impacts of the climate crisis. This is the critical decade for climate action. It must happen on our watch. Climate justice is both a moral imperative and a prerequisite for effective global climate action. The climate crisis can only be overcome through cooperation between peoples, cultures, nations, generations. But festering climate injustice feeds divisions and threatens to paralyze global climate action. We have never been better equipped to solve the climate crisis. Let us work together to get the job done. It has been said that there is nothing more powerful than an idea whose time has come. And now is the time for climate action and climate justice, and I thank you.
The latest report by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change warned that to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, greenhouse gas emissions must be nearly halved by 2030. With graphics showing individuals from babies to pensioners set to suffer ever more from rising heat, the report by the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change gives a more personal twist to findings about looming threats than its past studies directed at governments. Governments have fallen far short of pledges in the 2015 Paris Agreement to limit heating of the climate by shifting off fossil fuels amid crises including COVID-19, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, food shortages, and strained ties between China and the United States, the top 2 greenhouse gas emitters. The IPCC summary for policymakers condensing thousands of pages of climate science in 6 mammoth reports published since 2014, is sprinkled with references to healthier lifestyles such as cycling, walking, and diets rich in fruits and vegetables with less high carbon meat. It also outlines the surging risks to mental health from a warming climate.
The synthesis report brings together the key findings from 3 previous special reports and 3 working group reports. It stands on the shoulders of giants that brings forth its own insights and perspectives. The report offers hope, and it provides a warning. It warns that the pace and scale of what has been done so far and current plans are insufficient to tackle climate change. Deep, rapid, and sustained emissions reductions and accelerated adaptation action is required in this decade to address climate change. We are walking when we should be sprinting. In 2018, the IPCC highlighted the challenge of keeping warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. 5 years later, the challenge is even greater. The impacts of human-caused climate change are unfolding with bracing clarity. More frequent and more intense droughts and flooding, threats to our food and water security, illness, and death. The report shows that climate impacts are undermining our livelihoods. They are damaging the global economy, and the impacts threaten our life support system, the nature itself. Every increment of warming will lead to rapidly escalating hazards and widening regional differences. When the risks combine with other diverse events, such as pandemics or conflicts, they become increasingly difficult to manage. Sadly, as the report makes clear, losses and damages are part of our future.
The last such summary for policymakers in 2014 had far fewer references to individuals and their behavior.
Thank you for that question.
The latest one was approved after a week-long meeting of scientists and governments in Switzerland to negotiate the text. The report reiterates previous Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change findings that it is unequivocal that humanity is to blame for climate change. But notably, in a different from earlier reports, it shows high or very high confidence from scientists about the scale of coming risks and the shrinking opportunities to address them.
The question is, can we deploy those options quickly and effectively, enough to cut emissions to create a safer, sustainable future for everyone? Can we protect ourselves with more resilient practices and infrastructure? That's the challenge. Limiting warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius requires deep, rapid, and sustained reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. In all sectors, emissions will need to be cut by almost half by 2030 if we want a chance to stay at or below 1.5 degrees Celsius. More reductions will need to follow. But action now along many dimensions could result in the transformational change essential to the future we all wish for. A future not just for ourselves, but for generations to come.
As Human Rights Watch summed up the resolution, it is indeed a powerful demonstration of effective multilateral diplomacy led by a state from the global south on behalf of people at risk. It is also important to focus through the lens of human rights on the obligations to protect those communities suffering most acutely. But still, there's a long way to go. Countries will submit input over the next year, and it could take the court around 18 months to issue an advisory opinion. So, we wait. That's our show for the week. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next week.